we can kick it off just talking about some of the issues that we're already seeing this year. But if people, I'll give it a minute, just if people have questions right off the top of their head that they want to address, can start typing or talking. Well, I can maybe just start talking about high tunnels, I think, are a big part of the production work this time of year. And then greenhouse bedding plant starts. I heard from one grower yesterday that there were heater issues, so keeping track of our temperatures and systems is a big part of the scene right now. Are folks working on high tunnel amending, soil testing? We were just starting out, just soliciting questions and conversation in the chat or unmuting. But in the meantime, before people want to pipe up, I was just starting to talk about some of the things that are on kind of on my plate, I guess, in terms of the questions and emerging issues this time of year. But yeah, so I think we can cover some high tunnel soil issues. I'm thinking a lot about amendments and prep for the season. We actually I was just telling Laura before people hopped on that we're in the middle of reskinning a tunnel today, and it's not going as smoothly as it's supposed to. So how many times we have to do things and still have it not go perfectly is kind of entertaining. Anybody have advice for when you're putting a second layer on and there's moisture in between layer 1 and layer 2? Hans thinks it's funny.
Well, if they're inflated and it goes to the outside, you might get some
Well, yeah,
exchange after the fact.
yeah. I mean, it's the friction of getting it pulled over right now. That's the problem, because they're like, kind of smooshed, and there's only three of
Can
them.
you flip it up at all to kind of get a little air underneath there?
That's our strategy, the parachute.
Yeah.
Like the kindergartners playing with the parachute move.
Right.
But it might magically get fixed while I'm in this meeting, so you guys can drag this out for a while.
Becky, you could potentially try installing that blower first, just to get some air movement going on inside there. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but those blowers typically will add quite a lot more air than you need between those two layers.
I was wondering about that. Okay, that's a good idea.
And it might actually help you, because when everything's dry, that rope pulling up over the top can provide some rope burn on that first layer.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Dan.
One thing we could share today, Becky, maybe are some things that are coming across our desks that growers could be doing differently, thinking about like using the right soil test or tissue test for the right thing.
Yeah, and I think also I just got a question from a grower as I was getting on this call, and he said, is recommendations part of your job? I don't want to bother you. And that's like very much part of our job. So not struggling so much with soil test interpretation and working together is really good.
And I can kick it off, I guess, because my comments are pretty short in that area, but I just dealt with a couple of them this morning. And one has to do with perennial fruits, where people are using soil tests and asking for recommendations, which is not the end of the world, but it's just not nearly as good as doing leaf analysis. And since all of those crops have a specific time of year where the leaves should be sampled, it's generally July and August. To mark your calendars now, if you grow those crops, for strawberries, it's after the new leaves are fully emerged on renovation, or the year before fruiting, if you're only going to fruit them 1 year. Blueberries, end of July, early August, raspberries, roughly that, but just so much more helpful, especially with blueberries, where the soil test is just really only good for pH. And then if you go to the Dairy One, which is the Cornell lab, you will get the Cornell recommendations, and you won't even have to ask anyone to follow up for what kind of materials. But $30, instructions are there, but a pretty small set of growers are actually doing that with those crops, and seems well worth it. And the other thing is, continue to see a lot of regular field soil tests in well-established high tunnels, where the results are simply that everything's off the charts and not nearly as informative as using the University of Maine long-term high tunnel test. they send you recommendations, or Becky has it all set up in spreadsheets to show what you'll need. And the reason it shows off the charts is those field tests are calibrated to field yields. And in the high tunnels, especially with tomatoes, the yields are significantly higher, so more nutrients are needed. But that is actually pretty common, that there's a lot of tunnel tests going through the regular field soil testing protocol. And a final thought is just irrigation water testing. A lot of people are not doing that, and then sometimes they see nutrient deficiencies because alkalinity or pH is way off on the water. And if you have a well, you probably don't need to do that test very often at all. It'll be consistent, but you should do it once to find out if you need to be acidifying your water or not. And I think Penn State, it's $40 test. So worth doing before you have thousands of dollars of seedlings being watered with water that is tying up nutrients. That's what I have based on this morning's email.
And what about you? What are you seeing right now?
I think the main thing is in high tunnels, it's so tricky this time of year when we've got these fluctuating temperatures and you're taking off and putting on row covers, seeing some foliar leaf spot, fungal foliar leaf spots. Saw some Phoma blackleg on brassicas in probably 3 different instances. So I think the bottom line is, you can't rescue that stuff with a fungicide, especially the organic fungicide. So you really have to, monitor your row covers and just never put row covers on wet. And then once it gets warmer, we're all good. But it's just this transition time that's really, really tricky. And you just want to make sure that those row covers are dry before you put them back on the plants. The other thing this year, somebody said something about turning on heaters is ethylene damage. So if you see curling and twisting in foliage in your seedlings, especially tomatoes, all of a sudden, it's probably a good idea. Always make sure you get your heaters checked during the season. But that's usually what happens there. There's a cracked heater or something and it's leaking ethylene gas. So those are the main 2 problems I'm seeing right now, I guess.
The other thing we see every spring related to tunnel environment is chilling injury, especially as the plants are succulent. You see it on tomatoes, kind of whitish, dead areas that don't have any spores or rings or anything like that. And often it's the plantings at the edge of the tunnel, every year there's a number, especially after it's warm and then you get a cold snap.
Yeah, we just saw those pictures. And one thing growers can do too is look at those spots. If it's a really clear delineation between the dead area and the live green area, that's pretty typical of something abiotic like chilling injury. A fungus, a lot of times you have an advancing yellow margin. But boy, tomatoes, they just do weird things with low temperatures and they always look like junk in the beginning of the season, it seems like. And always look at that new growth. If you see a problem in your seedlings, check the root system first, make sure it's a good, healthy root system, eliminate root rots, and then look at that brand new growth. And if that looks good and healthy, then it's likely an abiotic thing, and the plants are going to grow out of it. Just sit tight. The other thing people see this time of year too is edema when it's hard to water when we don't know if it's going to be cloudy and cold or sunny and warmer, and you water like you think it's going to be sunny and warmer. But that plant takes up all that water, can't transpire it because it's cloudy and cool. And then you get these little lesions typically on the undersides of the leaves, often along the leaf veins in spinach, tomato, ivy geraniums is a big one. But again, the plants grow out of it. And once we get sunny weather, they grow out of it pretty fast.
Hans, Hans and Julie, any food safety? Oh, Andy too. Any updates there? Things you're seeing? Cool equipment?
This is the time of year, as many of you know, that you're reviewing your plans for the year and kind of just getting set for any of the risk management stuff in general so that you're queued up for success. And a lot of people have CAPS plans, and it's kind of, one of the things that we've talked about, and I know growers who are pretty successful with it do often, is schedule stuff like, so the testing, you're talking about soil testing, but there's also, water testing potentially, or other things coming up like manure, logs, and, basically all the things you're going to be recording, getting those set up and ready to go now when you have a little space. So you're not doing it at the last minute when you have, 4 orders and you realize that you're really going into high gear and you're already in the pinch point, and then, oh, I didn't get that clipboard up, or I didn't do this thing, or didn't get set up, and then it just turns into a real headache that drags you down. And on that note, I wanted to share kind of one document that Julie, who's on the call, put together from our whole CAPS process. And this is kind of a culmination of, just like a checklist for this time of year to go over some things, and I'm not going to spend much time with it, but I would love to just flash it up on the screen and sort of hit a couple of key items. And then, if anyone on the call either wants a copy or wants to follow up, go for it. But so this is kind of a paper version that's distilled out of what you would do, as a grower sort of in this year-long process. So is that okay if I share something real quick? Take it just a couple minutes here. Let's see, go to safety checklist. I think this is it. Yeah, and again, full credit to Julie on the call, and she's welcome to jump in. But this is sort of winter, spring, when you can sit back and take some time. And of course, this produce safety planning, a lot of people are in that. You don't have to be to do this stuff, but the produce safety planning sort of cues you up and has a method and kind of keeps one in line for checking this stuff. So, any of your certificates for market access, what's upcoming, any kind of new risks that are on the land or changes to your farm, floods from last year, how are you going to deal with that? Maybe you told yourself you're going to do something to prepare better for a potential flood or potential this, but now's the time to make sure that you actually follow through on that, because it's too late once it's 3 minutes till the riverbank floods. This is this compliance stuff for manure and compost, mentioned that. Think about your irrigation. Is everything good with that? Have things been changing? Have you been shy on that, in multiple times, or worried? This is time to just spend some time and dedicated time, take a morning and just like, I'm going to go through this stuff. I'm going to order my thing, set it up, and really just carve out that time. Do you have enough containers, dedicated containers in place? Cleaning routines, are they set up? So the detergents, are they where they should be? Is everything kind of, if you've tidied up the place and cleaned out anything that's not absolutely necessary, and done a deeper clean, is it scheduled where you're going to do that before things get up and running? And then, check any of these SOPs that are essential, and maybe you consider like printing some of them out for employees, or taking a picture of the way things should be exactly, and and tell employees to set it up that way. Water test I mentioned. Wash waters, if you're using sanitizer, make sure you've got enough and you can safely dispense it. A lot of people have like been, oh, here's my jug, and oh, I got to get some out. And you try to pour it out of a 5-gallon tub and end up burning your hand or something like that. So making sure you've got that down. Cold storage, a lot of these compressors, any of the maintenance, make sure your thermometers are working. Do you have your plan for training employees if you have them? Check if their bathrooms, check them, porta potties, make sure everything's ready to go. First aid kits, you're out of Band-Aids. Being out of Band-Aids with a little first aid kit could cause blood dripped all over the wash pack room, and like an extra hour of time probably messing around because someone's looking for something. So take a little time to do that first. And if you would like either a copy of this thing that I'm just sharing, or just any support in this, again, the CAPS platform is great for this because it will walk you right through everything. But that's a good way of just sort of seeing it up close and personal here, in a paperless form. And I'll stop sharing. And well, Julie, you want to add anything to that? And if anyone wants to mention anything, go for it. Julie, why don't you start if you have anything?
No, sure. Just a lot of those highlighted links. That's a lot of the ag engineering resources just kind of matched with what you're doing on the farm. And then a bunch of the stuff Agency of Ag has done, especially around post-harvest wash water, the new FSMA regulations. That's all included in there. And we can share this out. And just to reiterate, we're here for the questions and individual technical support too, whether or not you're writing a produce safety plan. And Hans, I don't know if you want to plug your upcoming programs at some point too.
Oh yeah, thanks. So yeah, some of you, there are a lot of service providers on the call, but you guys as well. On Monday the 18th, there is a couple of growers, Small Axe Farm and also Rusty Plow Farm over in New Hampshire, are going to share, sort of look back at their whole CAPS and produce safety planning originally, and sort of gearing up for markets, and how they, what were some of the resilient things that kind of popped out as being, wow, this was super helpful, or in writing a produce safety plan. So they're going to show some pictures and present on that. And I'm going to gather up some photos out of our, mostly Andy's photos, like 500 stockpile, to show some of these key essentials that we've seen kind of for building market integrity in general, that through a produce safety planning lens. And that's on Monday for an hour and 15 minutes at 12. And I put it out on the listserv. Noon to 1:15. Put it out on the listserv, but feel free to spread the word or join. It'd be great. Along these lines, so this is from Trevor: preparing, organizing, management for onboarding seasonal and green employees. Does anyone have resources for management strategies for training best employee performance? Oh boy. Yeah. So right, HR, human resources support, employee support, gearing them up. Yeah, Trevor, there are definitely resources probably at UVM. The closest could drop a link in the chat to the farm labor dashboard, which has linked to a bunch of resources and has templates as well. And getting growers together who, cohorts is something that we intend to do, and it probably isn't going to happen this spring, but there's, lessons learned from other people. And I would open the floor for anyone who wants to comment who's here with that experience or something that really worked for them. Trevor, do you want to say anything more about that chat and specifically, and I can actually follow up on with you.
Yeah, I've got my video here. Hi, I work down in White River Junction at Sunrise Farm.
Oh, nice.
And so, yeah, along the links you sent are perfect. I think that's kind of what I'm looking for. And this time of year, it's always like you were saying, this is the time to kind of plan and strategize, and get the managers together so we can all be kind of on the same page. And I know this farm labor is like everybody's problem. It's definitely a struggle. And we've had great seasons and some difficult seasons with regard to that. But yeah, at the beginning, I always feel like, we want people to kind of get their bodies in through the motions, right? And we want them to follow along and not feel too much pressure. And then it's always this question of like, where do we raise the criteria, the expectations for pace, for quality and such. And I think everybody tries to thread that needle.
To just respond, this is a bit of particular interest and sort of, something I've really been attracted to, both just employees, that sort of feel of a farm. I visited hundreds of farms, and the crew feel, the mojo kind of, and then what's going on that matches that. So I spent years on farms, just like, it's in my head. It's not something I've really written up, but I definitely have a sense. And I will just share a couple of key things. One is that asking that question, Trevor, and I can say from Eli, actually caring is probably one of the fundamental most important things to success of the employees, and thinking of that you're caretaking, right, this group of humans that are very highly complicated to get the best efficiency. They need to be actually either enjoying it or motivated or feel like they're actually needed and they have something they can share or contribute, like those kinds of things. So how do you cultivate that? And I've seen it done a bazillion different ways, and it comes back to the personality and the style of the manager or managers and whether they get together, and then obviously communication. So it's the style versus and how it plays out in the process, so that the employee has there's like chances to check in, but clarity of roles. So different hats for different employees where they have responsibility. It could rotate, those kinds of things. And I've seen fun competitive stuff like, here's the job and here's the standard amount of time it takes to do the job. Can you beat it? Like this kind of like, and it works. It wouldn't work if it doesn't work for the manager, right? Like it's got to be something that is authentic. And I think that's kind of like what has really you keep coming to over and over when I come to farms, this authenticity, care, and then an actual working on and continuous improvement, a process that allows the employee to give feedback and grow in the job as well.
Trevor, I don't know if you caught too, like Hans hosted a webinar where people were sharing their HR, their employee handbooks. And even though that was like pretty focused on employee handbooks, I think some of the farmers who spoke there really offered themselves up as resources. And I mean, everyone has a different style, but I was really kind of in awe of their like learning process. And yesterday I was talking to a grower and he was like, I finally, he's like a very long-term grower, like many decades. And he was like, I finally have people coming back and I had changed my personality to be a good manager or to have that like, employee retention. So I think there's definitely some different ways to approach this, but Hans is building a really good library of resources. And I shared this the fair labor. I really like it and I like what they're doing. So any other growers on here have things to share about how they manage folks? Lissa, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm part of BTEX, which is the Fair Share CSA Coalition. I'm part of the being the employer of choice hybrid class that's going on right now, and it talks a lot about this kind of stuff. So Trevor, it might be something to look into because it's talks about onboarding and everything. And I also was part of the webinar about employee handbooks that you guys put on, and I thought that was really great. We do an employee handbook, but I think with new employees, just making sure you're reading through that at the beginning with everyone, preferably like have all the new employees start around the same time and read through it with everyone. And then the thing that I've kind of had trouble figuring out, but I think I found out now, is like nailing that sweet spot of like having people start early enough that they have like a runway before you get so busy that you want them to know everything, but not so early that you're like paying a bunch in labor that you don't really need. I don't know if that was your question exactly, Trevor, but those are two things that I found really helpful in onboarding new employees or like green farm employees.
Thanks, Lisa. One other really quick general comment too is this, there's sort of two camps of preparing for being a really good manager. And, it's classically the carrot and the stick. And you need both of them, I think, right? Like, as far as I know. So that cultivation of those employees in that positive way is obviously carrot based, but preparing for what you're going to do so it's in flow, and authentic and clear and consistent when shit hits the fan, I think is really, can be equally important, because something that goes really bad can just really set you back even years if it doesn't go well and the crew changes and all that.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of that. And yeah, it's a balance. And I come from I'm passionate about dog training, and so that language about positive reinforcement versus corrections has been helpful. But yeah, it's like the authenticity is so important. You saying that sort of reinforces for me that it's not positivity that's like blowing smoke up people's butts. It's got to be actually reinforcing to them and authentic from us. And so yeah, we have a good team of return employees who are all more responsible in some ways, and so yeah, it's mostly going well, and I think we just want to get the most out of the newbies when they come in. I think everything you guys said was helpful. Thank you.
So yeah, I think you guys are doing an amazing job at Honeyfield along these lines. So curious to see what you come up with for new stuff this year.
So one thing for us is having H2A workers who this is like going to be their 4th and 5th year coming back here. It really helps having that consistency. They kind of know the routine, and they're really good about giving input back to us about what improvements, because they're kind of always looking for new things to be able to do also. So I think that's really been a benefit for us of having H2A workers.
What about other stuff? Are folks trying any new varieties or new crops this year? Any big shifts that are happening? It's kind of the original topic for today's webinar, but we threw it up in the air and decided to do this instead.
Becky or Vern, looping back to soil testing, we need to do a soil test in the greenhouse as well as a bunch of hay fields. I know, does UVM still do it? Or last time I did it, I sent them to Maine, and then Vern mentioned Cornell. I didn't know if there was a preferred one or a better location in which to submit samples to.
So UVM will do the field and your hay field tests. Tunnel tests, we recommend Maine. University of Maine does a really good job with them.
Thanks.
A lot of labs do the same tests. So for me, some of it's turnaround time, and tissue tests in particular take a long time at a lot of the university labs. That's one reason I recommend the Dairy One lab, Ithaca, which does all kinds of forage field. It's a private lab that works with Cornell, but they're really fast on those, like a week or two versus a month or two. So, and they come with recommendations, and the other ones don't. They give you sometimes you get the chart of optimal range, but no amounts to apply. So that's helpful. That's just for small fruit. Fruit like tomatoes, you have to talk to us for recommendations. And UMaine and UVM, so UVM uses the UMaine lab to run the analysis. That's where people sometimes get confused. But if you send it to UVM, you get our recommendations, our output. So it's just something we're more familiar with. And so it's helpful to us to have that. But the UMaine tunnel test combines 2 tests, the potting soil test, the water extract, and the regular field soil test. So that's what's helpful. And then they've used those higher levels of recommendations for tunnel growth, which is so much higher. So it starts to get a little confusing. And water, again, Penn State's just a lot less expensive than anywhere else, and they're like all set up for irrigation water and agriculture tests. So just want to be clear. It seems like we're jumping around for labs, but it's efficiency, the kind of output, and what it costs. But I think a take-home message is whatever lab you use, sticking with it is really important, because if you jump around, you not only have different formats of outputs, but especially with soils, if they're using different methods in the lab, the numbers aren't comparable and it gets confusing.
Hey, Becky, do you have any recommendations for flail mowers? Just a standard flail mower, like brands. It's definitely going to be something we're going to be using a lot more cover crops and trying to do like minimal till, incorporating cover crops instead of using the rotavator so much.
And you're talking about a tractor, like
Yeah, just a tractor flail mower, like comparing Coons as compared to other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly see Coons, and that's like what I've used, but no, I don't have like any backing for a recommendation. But we can dig through the listserv archives. I think that question has been asked.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else here has any.
We have a Forgo we got from Brookdale. It's an 8-foot offset, so we can do ditch banks as well. It is a beast of a mower, but we do love it.
Yeah, I don't have a big enough tractor to handle that. I only have like a 45 horsepower tractor, so.
Yeah, they make smaller ones too. That
Okay.
Forgo does. They overall are very, very well built, being an Italian machine. So I do like them.
Okay, I'll check that out.
One thing I heard back in the
Um,
day was that some of the flow mowers don't have the removable knives, so that they're harder to replace or sharpen. So that's just something to look for. Because over the years, those get dull and they won't perform as well.
So do people have things out in high, like when do tomatoes go out? Is that not till April or is that typically March?
Well, the seedlings are out there now. It's
Oh,
whether
they are. Okay,
they're not in the ground in most
Right.
places. Some of it depends on how early your markets are and if you have ground heat. When do you set yours in the ground, Becky? Starting in April?
We're March 24th. It's a little early. Definitely a point of debate every year. Last year we were a little later, and I think there's the optimal return by planting like a week or two later, but there's also the edge in the market. So like for us, it helps to have them a little earlier. But and this year hasn't been bad so far for heating.
A really interesting question came in about the economics of ground heat or root zone heat, which is a pretty standard practice for people growing in the ground that do set plants early, just because it's hard to heat the soil by heating the air, and cold roots, the plants just sit there. But I did a deep dive. I was only able to find actually one study that looked at the cost benefit. And it sort of made sense that you get a lot more benefit if you plant them early. That later on that heat is not is necessary because the ground is warming up. And then I found a different study from Canada. I think that if you go too early, I mean, there's not enough light to take advantage of the extra warmth. So sort of a happy place in there. That probably is March and April, speaking generally, where warming the soil will show up and yield enough to make it worth having that system.
That was kind of what we found too, Vern, with our study was the like overall for everybody with all the different planting dates, ground heat didn't improve yield. But when we looked specifically at like the planting dates between like mid-March and end of April, there was an improvement in yield. And then for winter greens, I don't know if you remember, Vern, but a couple years ago, we collected data from Evening Song Farm because they were interested about how it, if it was worth it for winter greens. And that was really interesting to me because again, there wasn't an overall increase in yield, but it changed the timing of when they were able to harvest and a little bit of the quality. And I've heard Jericho settlers say this too, just like a higher quality green that's a little lusher and being able to maintain it throughout those doldrums of winter. So again, like capturing those market windows where there isn't a crop seems to be the advantage of it.
You know, if there's also been any comparison between like putting insulation on the outside of the greenhouse as compared to like bottom heat in the soil, how much of a difference that makes in those outer beds, especially from keeping the cold from coming in through the soil.
I haven't seen data on yield or growth, but I know John Bartok, the ag engineer retired at UConn, had temperature data that clearly showed it doesn't get as cold when you insulate the edges. And I think almost all growers have seen that edge effect where the plants are just smaller and slower to grow.
Right.
Again, the benefit's probably greater if you're growing early and it's colder outside.
Yeah. I'm looking at because we definitely have that in the winter greens, like that outer couple of rows, and those outer beds are always a little bit slower, a little bit smaller, and can tie up nutrients a little bit too. So we're looking at this putting some insulation on at least one of the houses to kind of keep that growing a little bit better.
And I did a study years ago at a farm that had 6 beds in a pretty large greenhouse of tomatoes, and it was a nutrient study. But one thing we saw, the outer rows had yield that was depressed almost by a third compared to the center rows. It was pretty dramatic. And my unsubstantiated take on that is there are actually several factors at play. I think temperature is one of them. The other thing, like in that house, they applied their compost by backing in a spreader. And I think you
Uh-huh.
just get an uneven distribution. There's more fertility in the middle of the house.
Right.
And then it's just harder to work on those row edges and they get less TLC in general.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, when you add that up, like, wow, if you solve that problem, that's a pretty big bump in yield.
Right.
I'm also curious about that insulation, Tim, and I wonder, I bet Paul and Sandy have probably some data on that. I'm guessing because they've done all that temperature collecting. I guess one thing I struggle with is like just the shedding from the insulation. Like if you have blue board and inevitably it's going to get like bumped or poked by a piece of equipment or a tool. So I saw a couple farms that like had, I think it was kind of expensive, but custom sheet metal kind of wrapped around it and in all of that embedded so that there's no of the, little foam pieces everywhere.
I was looking at the difference between either laying the blue board on the surface or actually digging a trench along the outside without disturbing the integrity of like the pipes holding up the greenhouse too much.
Yeah, I think it's trickier after the fact for sure, to get it in. That might be a good listserv question.
Becky, one of the things I've been seeing some folks doing recently with new tunnels going up that I really liked is you can apparently get some prefab garage door panels, insulated garage door panels. So it's totally wrapped in metal. And that seems to be working well for folks. So a little structural as well as insulated.
And are they burying those? Like,
Yep.
About potting mix issues, this is the time of year we usually have a handful of people that report erratic performance. You seen any of that over in Maine, Caleb? I haven't heard any reports this year.
I've had one so far, and it appears to it may have been a combination of a fair bit of nitrogen plus they were having issues in a germ chamber, so they were really watering, so it was like overly wet mix, and so then I think they were getting ammonia really messing things up.
How about hot water treating seeds? That's another thing that comes up this time of year. And any new information on that? I think UMass was still offering it as a service and
Yeah.
seed companies will do it. What are you recommending that for?
Well, definitely with brassicas, all your brassicas, maybe tomatoes too, but I think that when we did that, we did a little workshop once on hot water seed treating. Companies don't make it really apparent that they have treated the seeds, so you don't want to do it twice. So it's never a bad idea to make sure that the seed you're buying has, if it's been hot water treated or not. And I was just on a call with, I guess they've just figured out that spinach downy mildew is seed-borne, but I don't know about hot water treatment for that. But Elizabeth Hodgson at Cornell has a video that I'm going to try to get that I could share on the listserv, maybe on using sous vide, one of the sous vide machines to hot water treat seeds, which I think is a pretty inexpensive way to do it. So I'll try to grab that video from her and then share it on the listserv or something.
I see Andy nodding, so maybe there's a ag engineering video to build on that. And Paul, from seed company point of view, what are you folks offering? What are you recommending for hot water treatment?
High Mowing offered steam treating. That was a thing that Tom was working on, and I think Ann, you had something to do with some of those numbers or something, but
Yep.
Very effective with certain crops. We do offer it. It's for a retail seed house like ours. It's kind of a weird gray area because to do it, the lot that gets purchased needs to be large enough that it's worth the cost of doing it, and two, we have to run the seed through germ testing afterward. So there's an amount of seed that needs to get peeled off. So when people are buying, 500 brassicas or something, it just really becomes quickly not worth it. But for someone who's like, if someone were planting, direct seeding spinach or something along those lines, some of the squashes we've done for folks, and Swiss chard we've done for folks, but it's always something that we question whether it's totally worth it for us to be doing.
Mhm.
It really does feel like it, but to me personally, I'm going to take my high mowing hat off. I feel like it belongs to the end user, this process. And what Ann said, I can speak to, which is we do our best to make sure that every lot that has previously been heat treated is marked on the packet with HT. And I can usually dig into a lot specific thing if it's something like you're planning to do it and you want to make sure. I can usually do some forensics to be sure. Most of the heat treating that we're seeing is coming from Beijing in either brassicas or celery or celeriac.
And do you assign a cost if you guys do seed treatment, do the steam treatment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I use it so infrequently, I can't tell you what it is. right now.
Okay, yeah,
There's even like a contract too, like like a waiver thing and the whole 9 yards.
yeah, yeah.
Just put the UMass link in there and you can go to their form. I think it's $6 an ounce for seed treatment, water seed treatment.
Yeah, the seed sous vide thing might be an easier thing, because otherwise I've done seed treatment before and you really need a cold bath and a hot bath, and you need really good thermometers and you really have to pay attention. But the sous vide might be a better, more grower friendly way to do it. And then you've got a sous vide machine. If you want to, I don't know what you sous vide, steaks or some meat thing.
Yeah, like an easy bake oven. Dating
I think
myself.
it's a wand thing that you put in the water, right? Andy, did you know what a sous vide thing was?
Yeah, just this last weekend, actually, a friend of mine got this little kit. And yes, it was a tabletop, we'll say plastic tote, with a lid, and then it had a stick, which I assume had a little heater and a thermometer on it. And then it actually has a countdown timer as well. So he had his vacuum sealed steaks and he put them in there, and it held it at like 130 degrees for 2 hours. So they got mostly cooked, and then you threw them on his Blackstone and seared both sides to make some primo steaks. So yes, I can picture that little tabletop thing, and I'm like, yeah, that would hold temperatures. That would be a pretty good universal tool. And I think he said it was only $80 or something.
Yeah, I
It
think
was
it's pretty
not very
inexpensive.
expensive. So it's
Yeah,
a
you
good
might want to
multi-use.
calibrate it though to make sure that temperature it's reading out is.
Whether you're using it for seeds or dinner, that would sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I've been listening into the Cornell seed saving course, and they did a demo using it, and Andy just described it pretty well, but it sounded like you should heat treat and then seed the next day. That the turnaround time on seeding should be pretty quick, was my understanding.
On a separate topic, I was on the soil health call that Angus Baldwin organized this past weekend. There was a lot of talk about inoculants, and just wondering if folks on this call are using mycorrhizal inoculants on their seed. Sound like seedling treatment was what was being used, especially growers talking about using it on onions. Seeing much of that, Caleb in Maine. Tim, have you guys been doing that on your farm, or anyone else?
We tried some a couple of years ago, and I was actually on the same Zoom with you, Vern, and Fedco has the mycorrhiza inoculant that they were talking about. So we did actually order some, and I'm going to use it especially on onions, but I'll try it on some other crops as well to see if we get any improvements on it or less root disease kind of thing?
On that call, there was some talk of organizing a grower on-farm trial network to try and get some side-by-side data at different locations. First step's going to be sort of figuring out the question that people have in common. So that was one of them. Use of rock dust, use of biochar, those kinds of things came up. I did find this great document by Joseph Goris, soil scientist at UVM, about how to make your own on-farm mycorrhizal inoculant. Just came out last year. And I remember hearing an ARS scientist at one of the New England fruit and veg conferences talking about that tends to be more effective, even when you apply something you purchase, that the native mycorrhizals populations dominate for a reason, because they're so well adapted to your unique farm. So that caught my interest too, that, I mean, it's much like the hot water treatment, one more thing to do and you need to follow the procedures, but that document laid it out fairly simply if you wanted to get going on it.
There was a great podcast too on the I think it was on the Real Organic podcast with Tim Bowles, I think. Caleb will remember he's an agroecologist in California, and he was talking a lot about arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and their reaction to tillage, and just the abundance of spores that are actually in the soil was pretty compelling. And again, like having your native populations is really the best, according to his research, the best methodology. But his podcast was really cool. And then I mentioned him to another scientist at UVM, and he kind of was like, well, so I think there's like definitely debate to be had about it. But anyway, I can pop the link to that in the chat.
I meant to pipe up during that meeting this weekend and let people know about a poster that I saw at the Marbleseed Conference last year, the University of Wisconsin research, which, and I have a link here, I'll put it in the chat. I don't think it's University of Wisconsin. I think this link is from somewhere else, but which basically drew some comparisons between, on organic farms, between older heirloom varieties and newer hybrid varieties and their ability to relate to arbuscular mycorrhizae. And the poster was, the data in the poster was like mind-blowing. Like that, there just seemed in this poster to be no imprint on the hybrid genetics for them to be able to do anything with this stuff, as opposed to heirloom varieties. But I wanted to bring that up this weekend, and I couldn't find the link, so I didn't feel like it was appropriate to bring it up. But it's something to be thinking about and looking at as well, in an age where we're really, trending towards, hybrid vigor and reliability of those F1s, just including, the company I work for.
So are you saying that the mycorrhizae didn't work for the hybrids, but it did work for the heirlooms, or what?
The title is Inoculation with Arbuscular Mycorrhizal Fungi has a more significant positive impact on the growth of open pollinated heirloom varieties of carrots than on hybrid varieties under organic management conditions.
Okay.
I can't also refer to where, but I've seen similar research, Paul, that like we've kind of bred out a lot of the plants, like associations with the hybridization.
Or not chosen for those characteristics. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by nature breeding it out. Yeah, pretty interesting.
And they seem to grow fine. This kind of sometimes comes back to me. I'm like, well, the watermelon, hybrid watermelons seem to grow just fine. So maybe we could reduce the nutrient applications if we had better mycorrhizae, but yeah, bigger question.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these, it's you would have to have like 90% of the conversation be just setting the context of in what system, because every bit of sugar that goes to feed that mycorrhizae is not sugar that is going to grow the plant. And so there's trade-offs, but if you're in a system where you need better access to water and phosphorus, then having that mycorrhizae might really help. But I hope that my growers that I work with have enough phosphorus and have access to water, right? So I feel like in those cases, it becomes more marginal of a benefit potentially.
And just seeing the association doesn't necessarily translate to yield either. I found a really interesting review of the literature that I didn't share at the meeting because there was a lot of enthusiasm for not, but basically said there's, two kinds of studies are not talking to each other. One is looking for all the associations and showing how many plants quote unquote benefit, but not actually looking at impact on yield or reduction of inputs. So just as Caleb said, it's complicated. But it would be nice to have some side-by-side trials to figure out, because we heard some pretty strong testimony on that call of a benefit from one grower, so wouldn't want to miss that if it is helping onions.
Yeah, it seems like there's some real follow-up to be had to that call. I got halfway through the recording last night. The other half will be tonight's entertainment. But I'm aware the time is short. Any other questions?
There was a question in the chat about a variety recommendation for firm cherry tomatoes.
I think
Paul's
that's really
wheelhouse.
Paul's department. I mean, I like most of the hybrids like that high mowing and Johnny's Carry that are the newer ones are fairly firm depending on when you harvest them and your water management. But Paul, if you have any especially firm ones you like.
It depends on what class. I mean, I think the grape tomatoes are the most, easy to move around and market. As far as a red round, I'd probably choose something like Cherry Bomb, but I'd probably choose a red grape before, if post-harvest toughness was being rugged post-harvest, I'd probably choose a grape tomato before I did a red round. But
Thanks, Paul. It's 1 o'clock. If any wrap up, but otherwise we can head off and either finish lunch or get back to work. Thank you guys for joining.
Good luck skinning that greenhouse.
Bye-bye.
Bye.